Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me now? Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me? Hello? Assalamu alaikum. Hello? Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me? You can use my phone to do this, you can't. Hello? Thank you. Am I loud enough? Alhamdulillah. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Can you hear me? We'll be starting in just a couple of minutes. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Can you let me know if you can hear me clearly? Okay, then we'll get started, inshallah. So I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for joining me on this Saturday morning. I know it's a busy day and there's a lot of other events happening today, so thank you for joining me. I want to thank the Academy for giving me this opportunity to talk to you this morning on nutrition, and inshallah it will be a helpful presentation. I'll be presenting on some of the topics my patients and friends ask a lot about these days, topics that have a lot of misinformation and myths around them. Please feel free to type in your questions, and although I have a lot to cover today, I'll do my best not to rush through, and I will try to get to all the questions at the end. So we'll be covering some of the topics I find people ask me the most questions about. It was hard to narrow it down, so hopefully I've picked things that are relevant to you. So let's start off and talk about headlines versus guidelines. Headlines are just that. They're trying to sell a story. They don't always give you the whole picture, and the media often doesn't know how to interpret scientific information or research. When we look at guidelines, these are based on many studies and the best available evidence for health for the general population. But they're just that, guidelines. So why do recommendations change over time? Well, as we learn more about nutritional science and as we change as a society, recommendations around healthy eating can change. It's important to remember, though, that one study or theory is rarely enough to change our advice. Basic healthy eating advice, such as eating lots of fruits and vegetables, dairy, legumes, nuts, fish, and exercising every day, has always been a recommendation that hasn't changed. Nutrition information is everywhere. Books, the internet, news, social media, and even from well-meaning friends and family. It's great that everyone seems to be into healthier eating these days, but how do you separate good information from hype? So I wanted to start with just some tips on how to find reliable nutrition information. So one thing is to see if the person or product is promising a quick fix or a miracle cure. Usually, if it's too good to be true, it likely is. Making healthy changes is unfortunately not a quick fix, and it takes time to change your eating into a healthy pattern and to incorporate exercise. 2, are they trying to sell you special foods or supplements instead of real foods? And I think this is a big one. Our focus should be eating on real foods that we can cook and enjoy daily, and not on one particular superfood or an expensive supplement. Do they provide information based on personal stories or facts? It's really nice to hear success stories from celebrities, but that doesn't mean that that product or food is good or of benefit. Real nutrition advice should be based on scientific research. And if it is based on scientific research, are the claims based on a single study or many studies? Were the studies done on animals or humans? And I think this is where the media often goes wrong because they don't give you the whole story. A short-term study done on mice may not apply to your health. And then lastly, what are the person's qualifications? You wouldn't ask a celebrity to build a safe bridge. You would ask an engineer. I think the same goes for nutrition advice. And this is where you want to find somebody who knows the science behind the recommendations. This is where registered dietitians are university trained, regulated health professionals who give you advice on the best available information. And they tailor it to your individual circumstances. I will do my best today to present the latest scientific research. And some of it, I understand, might be a little controversial. Some of it might be very different than what you've seen online or posted on pages of hundreds of different influencers on social media. I think it's important to note that everyone is different. There is unfortunately no one size fits all when it comes to diet or nutrition. Nutrition information is not always black and white. Sometimes it's gray. And that's because our genetics, our gender, our body size, hormones, health issues, and medications all play a role in our food choices. A good diet is one that works for you. It's a healthy eating plan that tastes good, makes you feel good, and keeps you healthy. So, as I said, I will present the latest scientific research, but at the end of the day, it's your choice. Go with what works for you. But make sure you make your decision based on reliable information and not just on what's trendy out there. So let's start off and talk about weight loss diets. It seems that come January, everyone's trying to get healthier, and oftentimes they think that losing weight is a big part of getting healthier. Unfortunately, it's not so easy, and losing weight doesn't necessarily mean better health. If we look at North America, weight loss diets are a multi-billion-dollar industry because they know people go on these diets, they'll pay for it, and they'll fail, and they'll come back. When we look at the research, no studies have shown that any diet can result in the long-term maintenance of weight loss for the majority of people. In fact, most will regain the weight within 1 to 5 years, and 60% of people will regain more weight than they lost. We know that weight loss diets lead to slower metabolism and permanent changes in your hormones, making it extremely difficult to maintain weight even if you're eating less. An example might be the show The Biggest Loser. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but these participants lost huge amounts of weight. But now, if we look at all of them 5 or 6 years later, they've all regained the weight and their metabolism has slowed down considerably, so they can't even maintain or lose weight anymore. We know that weight cycling, or that process of losing, regaining weight, that yo-yo dieting, is directly related to being less physically and mentally healthy. So it's actually worse for you than staying at a stable weight. 1 in 4 diets will develop into an eating disorder. And we know that many of the current diets out there, such as low carb, keto, fasting, etc., go against intuitive eating or listening to our body's needs. And they often lead to disordered eating and that weight cycling. So, I often think that's almost unethical to promote these diets for weight loss. So let's talk about some of the popular foods and diets out there. And I want to start off by talking about juicing. Juicing's been a trend that has come and gone and come back again recently. And things I hear are juices are a concentrated way to get my vitamins and antioxidants, and that raw fruits and vegetables are much healthier than cooked, or that drinking juice is just as healthy as eating fruits and vegetables. And I make my own juice, so that's much better than buying juice. And drinking cold pressed juice detoxes my body. So let's look at the facts. When you take a typical glass of pure or no sugar added juice, whether you've made it yourself or you've bought it, it contains 25 to 35 grams of free sugar. Now, just to put that into perspective, a teaspoon of sugar is 4 grams. So we're looking at 7 or more teaspoons of sugar per glass of juice. This is almost the same as you get in soft drinks and pop. Now, on the other hand, if we compare that to a serving of fruit, that typically has 10 to 15 grams of natural sugar that's bound with other nutrients and fiber. So it acts in a very different way in our body, and it doesn't raise our blood sugar or cause inflammation as much as juice will. We know that most commercial and home juicers leave behind the fiber. That's the good stuff. And unfortunately, there are no superfoods that will cure all when they're juiced. I know last year celery juice was a big trend, and celery is good, but there were no super benefits to celery juice, and I'm glad that trend is sort of waning right now. All fruits and vegetables are healthy, and the key here is to aim for a large variety and include them both raw and cooked. There are benefits to raw, but there are also certain nutrients that are released when fruits and vegetables are cooked. So use a combination. When we look at most of the healthy eating guidelines, they recommend either limiting or avoiding juice for both children and adults. So what about smoothies? Well, blending whole fruits and vegetables is much better than juicing them. But you should be aware that they don't keep you as full as long as solid foods. So when you have liquid calories, they don't give you the same satiety as solid calories. If you are making a smoothie, try to include extra fiber and protein by including things like milk, yogurt, nuts or nut butters, seeds, and throw in some greens for those extra vitamins. Smoothies you buy can vary quite a bit in their sugar and calorie content, so always ask for the nutrition information and watch your portion size. You really don't need that 24-ounce smoothie. At the end of the day, I think the message is still to try to eat most of your fruits and vegetables whole rather than drink them. So that brings us to something tied in with juicing, and that's detox and cleansing. So what I've read is that we need to use products to clear the toxic waste from our body. Our gut is plastered with these toxins that we need to remove on a regular basis. And that detox diet can help with weight loss, less cellulite, improved digestion, increased energy, improved immunity, and better metabolism. Sounds great, doesn't it? So what is this detox and cleansing? Well, detox diets can last from 1 day to a month or more, and usually involve things like consuming only fruits and vegetables or juices, cutting out foods like wheat and dairy, consuming only a limited amount of foods or just water, avoiding caffeine, and sometimes also include solutions, pills, lotions, and other beverages. With cleansing, that's the removal of material from the colon by either using herbal or laxative preparations, following a diet that eliminates major food groups, or taking in large amounts of water, fiber, or juice. So let's look at the facts. Alhamdulillah, Allah has made our bodies so amazing. Our skin, our intestines, our lungs, and our liver, and our kidneys on a daily basis filter, break down, and remove waste and toxins from our body, whether it's toxins from our environment and the air, or from the foods we eat, or the medications we take. There is zero evidence that detox diets can do this job in terms of eliminating these toxic compounds from our system. And there's no evidence that cleansing improves our bowel health, prevents colon cancer, or results in permanent weight loss. So what about everyone who says, I feel so much better when I go on a detox diet. Well, I think part of that might be due to the fact that you're eliminating a lot of these highly processed foods, and simply avoiding these non-nutrient foods makes you feel better in the long run. Some things to be aware of with detox and cleansing in the short term. You can have side effects like cramping and nausea, vomiting, dizziness, headaches. But in the long run, you can permanently change the balance of healthy bacteria in your colon. And you can also end up with serious side effects such as changes in your electrolyte balance, low blood sugars, lower high blood pressures, interaction with your medications, as well as vitamin and mineral deficiencies if you're doing this long term. So maybe not such a great idea. Now I'm going to move on to one of my favorite beverages, and that's milk. And it seems that in recent times, milk's gotten a bad rap. And what I hear are things like milk has too much sugar, or milk causes weight gain. That if I have lactose intolerance, I need to avoid anything with lactose. Or that dairy causes inflammation, and that only babies need milk, not grown-ups. We can get enough calcium without having to drink milk, and that milk has too many hormones or antibiotics. So let's look at the facts. If we start off with the Holy Quran, in Surah Nahl, verse 66, we hear, we produce for you drink, milk pure and agreeable to those who drink it. And Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam had said, take milk as it grows the flesh and strengthens the bone. If we look at science, we know that milk is naturally a good source of vitamins and minerals such as calcium. In Canada, we're very lucky to have a well-regulated food system, and regulations don't allow growth hormones in our milk, and any milk sold must be free of antibiotics. We know from the research as well that people who live with lactose intolerance can still have small amounts of milk and dairy, or they can choose lactose-free milk, which is readily available. With long-term research around milk, we know that people who consume dairy have healthier body weights, stronger bones, and lower blood pressures. Research doesn't show that milk increases inflammation, and in fact, fermented milk products like yogurt actually decrease inflammation in our body, and that's a good thing for preventing chronic diseases. And lastly, it's very hard to meet our calcium requirement through vegetables and nuts and seeds. So to give you an example, if you were to have one serving of greens, that's about 50 milligrams of calcium. One serving of nuts is about 75 milligrams of calcium. And our daily goal is between 1,000 and 1,200 milligrams of calcium. So you have to eat an awful lot of that broccoli or kale to get enough calcium. So I thought it would be interesting to compare some of the milk and milk substitutes out on the market today. I've put together a list of the most common ones. And if we look at protein in particular, you'll notice that the protein content can vary. When you look at cow's milk, it's naturally high in protein. Some things like soy or oat milk are also a good source of protein, but a lot of your other plant-based milk substitutes have very little protein. Protein is of importance, especially as we age, and milk can be a good source of protein in our diets. So maybe thinking back to those smoothies, you might consider, rather than using a low protein beverage like almond milk or coconut water in our smoothie and then adding protein powder, why not just start off with milk that has natural protein in it? Now, if we look at fat and sugar, these can also vary in milk and milk substitutes. When we look at cow's milk, it does have some sugar, but that's the naturally occurring lactose in the milk. Other than flavored milk like chocolate milk, plain milk doesn't have added sugar. When we look at the substitutes, they can vary in their sugar content, but it's important to note that all of this is added sugar versus natural sugar. Calcium is quite comparable in all of them, and then the vitamin D can vary quite a bit. So all things to consider when you're choosing milk or substitutes. If we compare the ingredient lists, and I've looked at skim milk, soy, and almond milk here. If we look at skim, very simple ingredients, just milk, vitamin A, and vitamin D3. That's required by law. If we look at soy and almond milk, you'll notice that they're mostly water, and then they have added sugar, salt, other additives, and vitamins added to it. If you look at the D, you'll notice that in skim milk, it's vitamin D3. This is the one that's most readily absorbed by our body. And if we look at the plant-based beverages, it's D2 because D2 is the only vegan source, and that's not as well absorbed by our bones. So I think at the end of the day, the message is whether you choose milk or alternatives, take a look at the pros and cons and make a decision. So if we look at dairy, as I've mentioned, we find it in the Holy Quran and Hadith. It's been around for centuries. It's been greatly studied. It's naturally high in vitamins, minerals, and high quality protein. And it's readily available, fairly inexpensive, and it comes in many varieties, including lactose-free. If we look at some of the downsides to dairy, it's not suitable if you have a milk allergy. It might have more of an environmental impact in production, and fuller fat choices might be a little higher in saturated fat, so you might want to stick to lower fat milk. Now, if we look at non-dairy, it is an alternative for those who have milk allergies. It's often lower in calories and sugar. It's lactose-free, it's plant-based. It might have less of an environmental impact, and it's low in saturated fat. Some of the downsides are that it's low in protein and minerals. It often contains many additives. The taste can vary, and the price can also be a lot more than regular dairy. Now you'll notice I've written shake well down there. And that's because in cow's milk, the calcium's naturally occurring, it's dispersed throughout the milk, whereas in these non-dairy alternatives, they add calcium, and calcium is a heavy mineral, it settles to the bottom. So make sure you shake your carton of plant-based milk very well before you drink it. You want the calcium in every glass, not just the last one. Okay, let's move on and talk about some facts. So coconut oil has become really popular in the last few years. And I get questions about coconut oil almost on a daily basis from my patients in cardiac rehab. They tell me things like coconut is a superfood, or it's the best oil to use in cooking. It doesn't impact my cholesterol levels. It's a healthy MCT oil. It helps with weight loss. It will prevent Alzheimer's disease. And it's going to help with my digestive issues. So let's take a look at the facts. We know that coconut oil is a solid at room temperature, and it's 91% saturated fat. That's about double the saturated fat that you find in butter, 2.5 times the saturated fat that you find in lard, and more than 6 times the saturated fat that you find in olive oil. It does contain some MCT, or medium chain triglycerides, but only 15% of the saturated fat is MCT. And there has been some research with the benefits of MCT oil, but you can't equal coconut oil to those research studies that use pure MCT oil. In fact, there's little evidence to show that it does the same thing. When we look at cholesterol levels, there is some evidence that coconut oil can help with HDL, or high density lipoprotein. That's your good cholesterol. But also, like all saturated fats, it will raise your bad or lousy cholesterol and your LDL levels. We know extra virgin coconut oil, or unrefined coconut oil, has a much lower smoke point than refined oil. So you have to be careful in terms of cooking at higher temperatures. There's very little low quality research to show that coconut oil in supplement form, along with a low calorie diet, might help with weight loss. and there's no evidence to show that coconut oil helps with other chronic diseases such as Alzheimer's or IBS. So what's the bottom line? There's no evidence to show that coconut oil has health benefits over other oils. Coconut oil may be a better choice than animal fat in terms of cholesterol levels, but it's not a better alternative to other vegetable oils such as olive. If you like coconut oil and the taste of coconut, maybe use small amounts in moderation. So for example, if you're using coconut in a dessert or coconut milk in a curry once in a while, that's okay. But I don't recommend that you use coconut oil in your everyday cooking, especially if you're living with or have a high risk for heart disease and diabetes. And I think if you're of a South Asian descent, you're already at a high risk for these. So let's talk about a healthy oil, olive oil. What I hear about olive oil is that I can't cook or bake with olive oil, and there are much healthier oils to use. And olive oil will ruin the taste of my curry. So let's take a look at the facts. When we look at olive oil, there's solid evidence from many, many long-term trials, including studies like the PREDIMED trial, that show the benefits of olive oil for cardiovascular disease, for diabetes, for cancer prevention, and for Alzheimer's. We know olive oil is mainly a monounsaturated fat that can lower LDL, that lousy cholesterol, and raise your good cholesterol. But what sets olive oil apart from any other oil is that it's full of antioxidants and other plant nutrients that have health benefits, including preventing cell damage and reducing inflammation in our body. Now, when it comes to smoke point, that's important, and that's the point at which your oil will start to burn and change. If we look at normal cooking temperatures in our kitchen, we're usually between 250 to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, if we look at the smoke point of extra virgin olive oil, it falls within that range. So for most cooking, it's absolutely fine. And we know in countries like around the Mediterranean or in Middle Eastern countries, they've been cooking with olive oil for centuries and haven't had a problem. Now, the exception would be if you're cooking at extremely high temperatures. So, for example, if you're doing something on the barbecue. In that case, you might want to use oil with a higher smoke point, such as peanut oil, avocado oil, or grapeseed oil. If we look in the Holy Quran, olives have been mentioned many times, and our Holy Prophet has said, "Eat olives and anoint with olive oil, as it is a blessed tree." I don't think we need more than that. So the bottom line is olive oil should be the main oil in our diet, and it has benefits when it's raw and also when it's cooked at moderate temperatures. Okay, so let's move on to some dietary patterns that are popular right now. And the first one I want to talk about is going gluten-free. So avoiding wheat and gluten has been promoted by books such as Wheat Belly and Grain Brain, as well as a lot of celebrities like Gwyneth Paltrow and the Kardashians. And if we look at the United States, about 30% of people consume gluten-free foods. That's great for the gluten-free food industry. Around the world, if we look at developed countries, about 20% of people prefer to buy gluten-free because they think it is a healthier choice. I often hear that, humans shouldn't be eating gluten, or that avoiding gluten will help with weight loss, and gluten causes inflammation and bloating. And if I have arthritis or fibromyalgia, gluten's really bad for me. And again, oftentimes people will just think that gluten-free foods are healthier and lower in carbohydrates. So what is gluten? Well, gluten is a group of proteins that occur in grains such as wheat. In regular wheat, it's about 75 to 85% of the protein. You also find it in related species such as spelt, barley, and rye, and foods that are derived from these grains. If you have celiac disease, you do need to avoid gluten, but only 1% of the Canadian population is living with celiac disease. It's an autoimmune condition in which the small intestine responds to gluten, and in the long term, this results in damage to the lining of the small intestine and malabsorption of nutrients. Symptoms include diarrhea, fatigue, weight loss, bloating, and anemia. It's easily diagnosed through a blood test and a biopsy, and unfortunately, there is no cure, but going gluten-free is important. Now, when we look at research around gluten-free diets, weight loss from going gluten-free is a result of cutting back on calories from starchy foods like breads and bagels and cookies and baked goods. It's not a result of cutting back on the gluten. Research does not show that following a gluten-free diet will decrease or control the symptoms of fibromyalgia or arthritis unless you already have celiac disease or gluten sensitivity. And this is the one that bothers me the most, is the last one, that gluten-free foods are often more expensive, they're higher in sugars and lower in fiber, and overall maybe not as healthy as your regular products. So check the label, especially when you're looking at things like breads and cereals and granola bars. Oftentimes they're much higher in sugar, refined carbohydrates, and lower in fiber. And oftentimes, gluten-free is a big marketing scam where they'll put gluten-free labels to sell the product. And oftentimes, these products never had gluten to begin with. So I bought a bag of potatoes the other day and it said gluten-free. Well, there was no wheat in those potatoes or no other grain, so they were naturally gluten-free. And I think that's more marketing than anything else. So what about people who say they feel much better when they avoid gluten? There's a condition called non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which results in a lot of symptoms similar to IBS or irritable bowel syndrome that include things like bloating, abdominal pain, diarrhea or constipation, and sometimes also just feeling mentally foggy or having headaches. It's usually a self-diagnosed condition. There are no biomarkers or blood tests, and there's no damage to the small intestine. It's really important that if you do feel these symptoms, that you, before you go gluten-free, you make sure that you're tested and you rule out celiac disease and other medical conditions. Now, if we look at the research around non-celiac gluten sensitivity, most of the research investigating this phenomenon has been done using wheat products or rye or barley products rather than pure gluten. So what most of these studies find is that there's no difference between consuming these gluten-containing foods and the placebo on symptoms. And in fact, when we look at an analysis of many studies, they found that only 15% of people actually had symptoms after eating these products, although all of them reported having gluten sensitivity. So it's proposed that individuals that have this gluten sensitivity may actually be reacting to other components in the grain rather than gluten. One of them are FODMAPs, or fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. These are a group of carbohydrates that often have the same sort of symptoms. And this is where you can consult with a dietitian and talk about FODMAPs, and you can follow a low-fat FODMAP diet for a short period of time to see if this resolves your symptoms. Another component in wheat are ATIs, or amylase trypsin inhibitors. These are more abundant in modern wheat species than in ancient grains, and that might be one of the reasons why we see more of this gluten sensitivity. Again, the symptoms of ATI sensitivity is very similar to gluten sensitivity. So I think the bottom line here is that we do need more research to understand the physiology of non-celiac gluten sensitivity. We need to understand how to diagnose it. Is it dose dependent? Is there a threshold of how much gluten you can have? And is it a permanent condition, or is it just a temporary condition based on a gut microbiome imbalance? So a lot of unknowns here. Okay, so moving on to some weight loss diets, and keto, or the ketogenic diet, has become really popular lately. You'll see a lot of companies promoting keto-friendly foods. So I often hear that the ketogenic diet is the healthiest way to lose weight and keep it off, or that my doctor told me to go keto, so it must be good, or that going keto will cure my diabetes and high lipids. I can eat as much meat as I want on keto, and it's really easy to do, so I can do keto for the rest of my life. Let's take a look at the research. So first of all, what is a keto diet? Well, a keto diet is a high-fat, moderate protein, very low carbohydrate diet. And it includes only about 20 to 50 grams of carbohydrate per day. To put that into perspective, one slice of bread might be between 15 and 20 grams of carbohydrate. It's definitely not a high protein diet because too much protein actually will lead to glucose production by the body. So what does the keto diet include? Well, it includes non-starchy vegetables like greens. It includes meat and deli meats, poultry, eggs, fish, nuts and seeds, avocado, oils, and full-fat dairy like cream and butter. What it excludes are most fruits, starchy vegetables like potatoes, dairy products like milk, all grains, legumes, those are your beans and lentils, and sugar-sweetened beverages. So in a traditional diet, when you're eating lots of carbohydrate, your body will break down these sugars and starches into glucose, and that's what your body will use for fuel for the cells. In a keto diet, where it's a very high-fat diet, your liver will convert these fats into ketones, and your body will use those ketones for energy. So if we look at the research, I've broken it down into weight loss, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes. So if we look at weight loss, the keto diet does show greater weight loss, but only in the short term, so between 3 and 6 months. If we look at weight maintenance or regain, after 1 year, it's very similar to other weight loss diets. Unfortunately, there are no studies that are longer than 2 years currently. And I think one of the reasons is because it's hard to sustain this diet, and it's hard to find patients who can do keto for the long term. It's not an easy diet to follow. When we look at cardiovascular disease, we know that these low carbohydrate ketogenic diets can help with your HDL or good cholesterol, and also decrease those triglyceride levels. But they also increase large particle LDL levels. And there are no long-term studies to look at the effects on cardiovascular health. So we don't know how beneficial these are. And in fact, if you are living with high cholesterol levels, you're usually advised not to go on a keto diet. Now, the last one is diabetes. And for a very small portion of the population, the keto diet can be a tool to lower blood sugars and an alternative to drugs to manage blood sugars. Now, short-term studies have shown the benefit in type 2 diabetes, but only if they're delivered in a clinically supervised manner, so lots of follow-up, close monitoring, and blood work done regularly, and also diet advice. It's not an easy diet to follow. Again, like the weight loss, there are no long-term studies to compare the ketogenic diet to other interventions for diabetes, such as the Mediterranean diet or the food diet. With keto, there are risks in the short term: constipation, keto flu, bad breath, muscle cramps, and general weakness. But in the long term, you're at a higher risk for kidney stones, changes to your gut bacteria, fractures, various nutrient deficiencies, impaired mood, and that weight cycling, so that gaining and losing weight. It's a very hard diet to follow without monitoring. And in fact, a lot of patients who come to me and say, I'm on a keto, when I actually look at their macronutrient distribution, so their ratio of carbohydrate to fat to protein, it's actually not keto, and they're not measuring the ketones in their body to make sure they are staying in that state of ketosis. So quite challenging. It's not safe for those living with diabetes that might be on medications such as insulin or Jardiance due to the risk of diabetic ketoacidosis. And if you are discontinuing a keto diet, there is the risk of repeating syndrome. So you have to be very gradual in reintroducing those carbohydrates. And again, as I've mentioned, there's no long-term safety studies. So let's move on to intermittent fasting. Fasting has been around for all of the ages as part of many religions, and it's been done in many different ways. Recently, however, intermittent fasting has become a trendy way to lose weight. And what I hear is that fasting is a quick and easy way to lose weight. It will cure all my health problems, and I can eat whatever I want during non-fasting time. Basically, there are 3 types of intermittent fasting. 16-8, which means 16 hours of fasting and an 8-hour window of eating during the day. There's 5-2, which is normal eating for 5 days a week, and then restricting calories to 500 to 600 calories per day for the remaining 2 days, and ADF, or alternate day fasting. So when we look at fasting in our body, it's a multi-organ process. It affects our brain, our cardiovascular system, our liver, our intestines, our muscles. So it works in multiple ways. And we know some of the benefits of fasting include decreased blood pressure, increased insulin sensitivity and better blood sugar, and also decreased inflammation. When we look at research on fasting, unfortunately, most of the long-term research has been done on animals. And in terms of human studies, there's a lot of variability between the study methods, the duration, the type of fasting used, and the longest studies are between 12 and 24 weeks, so no long-term studies. When we look at the short-term human studies, we know that fasting can help reduce weight. It can help reduce blood sugar and insulin resistance. It may lower LDL cholesterol and blood pressure, and it may result in healthier changes in the gut microbiome. And these can occur with or without weight loss. Many studies have found that fasting results in improvements comparable to continuous energy restriction or continuous weight loss diets. We know that long-term effects are missing, and we actually do need more research in this area. There's very little research at the moment comparing the different types of fasting, so to see is one way better than another. Now, if we look at fasting in Islam, and especially Ramadan fasting, there's just so much more to that than losing weight. Our Holy Prophet has said, fast and you will be healthy. And the research does show this. Lots of research done on Ramadan fasting, but short term again, so just during the month and maybe for a couple of weeks as follow-up. And we know that it will increase your HDL, the good cholesterol, decrease your LDL, or that lousy cholesterol. It results in weight loss, but usually that's regained within a couple of weeks after Ramadan, and it doesn't lead to long-term weight loss. But it also doesn't negatively affect our cognitive or athletic performance. So we can still write those exams and play those sports while we're fasting. Now, fasting on Mondays and Thursdays has been highly recommended by many of our mujtahids, but unfortunately not a lot of research in this area. But it's likely that this has long-term benefits. It's a great way to improve your physical and spiritual health throughout the year. So I guess the bottom line with fasting is do it to improve your health and your spirituality. Don't do it as a way to quickly lose weight. So what is a healthy diet? So I've given you some of the fads out there that aren't maybe so healthy. So what is a healthy diet? This week actually marks the 1 year anniversary of the new food guide. There's been some controversy over the past year and some criticism, but I think overall it's a good, simple way of looking at food. It's moved away from looking at portions and counting, how many servings, but it uses a plate method. So what it's promoting is going for that half plate of fruits and vegetables, including lots of variety and color, a quarter plate of whole grains, and a quarter plate of lean protein, with the emphasis on more plant-based protein. The food guide says to make water your drink of choice. And on the second page, it also looks at how you eat as being just as important as what you eat. So being mindful of your eating, focusing on your hunger cues, making meal times distraction free, um, enjoying and being thankful for the food you eat. And maybe if there is interest, we can do another webinar or workshop on mindful eating. The food guide also emphasizes cooking at home more often, eating meals with others, and enjoying food. Food is nutrients, but it's also pleasure. It recommends using food labels and limiting foods that are high in sodium, sugar, and saturated fats, and watching out for food marketing. You can download a copy of the food guide. The website is on the screen. And you can also sign up for tip sheets and recipes. These are available in multiple languages. And lastly, I'm going to leave you with some reliable nutrition resources. Most of them are web-based. If you live in Ontario, you can also speak to a registered dietitian for free by calling Telehealth Ontario. But I've given you some websites that give you reliable, evidence-based nutrition information. Okay, so that brings me to the end. Thank you so much. I know I've covered a lot of information. I hope I haven't gone too quickly, and I've been able to clarify some of the myths around healthy eating. If anyone has questions right now, I'll be happy to answer them. So if you wanted to type in a question, I can answer that. Thank you. If there are no questions, hopefully, the information has been relevant to you, and I thank you again for joining in this morning. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. I see a question added. I'm just trying to read it on my screen. If you don't mind retyping the question in the attendee chat box. I think Mariam S. had a question. Okay, if people are still online, I have a question um, of, about doctors are recommending plant-based diet with no dairy and eggs. Um, Why is that? I think there is a big move towards eating more plant-based diets. When we look at all the research and all the healthy diets out there, such as the Mediterranean diet, the DASH diet, or even the food guide, there is a big push to eating more plant-based foods. We know it's better for our health and better for the environment. In terms of avoiding dairy and eggs, I don't think there's a lot of science behind benefits to avoiding it completely. I think that's more of a personal choice. I know with eggs, for most of us, they're part of a healthy diet. They're easy and they're convenient. In terms of dairy, I think, again, it's a personal choice. If you can tolerate milk, I'm a big fan of it. And if you can't, then you might look at the plant-based alternatives. But I think all of us should be trying to eat more plants in our diet, eating less of these animal foods, but I don't believe that we need to avoid them completely. And I think that's what the current research is supporting as well. So great question. Thank you. And the question about milk in America, less healthy than Canada. Unfortunately, yes, there is a potential. The regulations in Canada and the US are quite different. I know in terms of hormones and antibiotics, there's a lot more that's allowed in the US that's not allowed in Canada. So I think if you are living in the US, that's your personal choice. You might want to look at the type and the where the milk is coming from, and maybe choose an organic variety if things like antibiotics and hormones are of a concern. Okay, thank you, everybody. Okay, one more question came in. What about plant-based proteins? So when we're looking at plant-based proteins, we're looking at the protein that comes from things like legumes, beans, lentils, chickpeas, tofu, as well as the protein that might come from things like nuts and seeds and grains like quinoa, which are high in protein. It's quite doable to get all your protein from these plant foods, so we don't need to have meat at every meal. And I think one of the recommendations that I give my patients is to try to have at least a couple of meatless meals every week. And then include things like your beans, your dal, your chickpeas, and foods like that at least 3 times a week. And we know that they're all high in protein, but also very low in saturated fat and much higher in plant antioxidants and fiber. So lots of benefits to eating more of these plant-based proteins. I hope that I answered the question there. Any last minute questions before we log off?